Good morning or good afternoon, depending on what time zone you're in. My name is Amanda Scott. I'm a Senior Director here at Capture Higher Ed, and I'm going to get us started today for our webinar on the state of graduate enrollment management, a conversation with NAGAP and Capture Higher Ed. Capture, if you're not familiar with us, is a higher education solutions company powered by the industry's leading behavioral engagement and machine learning technologies. Today's focus is the state of graduate enrollment management, so that's going to be the focus of our conversation today. I have a couple of housekeeping items. All of your lines are on mute today. However, we would love to have your questions. Please navigate to the control panel bar on likely the right-hand side of your screen. You will see there a question box where you can put in questions at any point in time. And at the end of today's presentation, we're going to spend some time going through the questions that you have with each of our panelists today. If we aren't able to answer all of the questions, you will receive any additional questions with answers to them in a follow-up. A very common question is, may I have the slides for today or a recording of the presentation? The answer is yes. You will also receive those materials at the end of this presentation as a follow-up from Capture. Have two shameless plugs here to start with. First of all, NAGAP has a upcoming deadline on Friday, December 21st for their very exotic sounding Winter Institute Conference in San Juan, Puerto Rico, January 17th through 18th, and this is for the Professional Development Institute. If you would like to go somewhere in January but maybe aren't going to get cleared to go to San Juan, which I would prefer, you could come to Louisville, Kentucky and visit Capture if you're a Capture partner. We have the Capture Users Conference for all of our partners named Resolve, get it, New Year's with resolutions. And the deadline for that is next Friday. So a couple of things that you have coming up both with NAGAP and with Capture. At this point in time, I'm going to turn it over to Jack Klett. He is Capture's Director of Graduate and Online Initiatives, who will introduce today's NAGAP leaders. Jack?
Amanda, thank you. And hello, everybody. My name is Jack Klett, Director of Graduate and Online Initiatives for Capture Higher Ed. As Amanda said, this is a Capture Higher Ed webinar, the state of graduate enrollment management, appropriately presented today in partnership with NAGAP, the Association of Graduate Enrollment Management. Now, graduate enrollment management, or GEM as we refer to it, continues to evolve and change as there is increasing adoption of the GEM model by institutions across the country. The integrated service model, which has been the foundation of modern undergraduate enrollment management, remains relatively new in graduate education, and yet there has been a significant increase in professional education around GEM, as well as direct training of graduate education professionals to adopt a GEM approach as part of the student life cycle. And as I think you will hear today, as well as I know you will hear today, it is clear GEM is here to stay as more and more institutions across the country are adopting this model of integrated service. I am so pleased to be joined today by the president of NAGAP, Keith Ramsdell, who also serves as Director of Graduate Enrollment and Assistant Dean of the Graduate College at Bowling Green State University. Keith and I are also joined by the Vice President of NAGAP, Jeremiah Nelson. Jeremiah also serves as Director of Charlotte MBA Enrollment Management at Wake Forest University School of Business. Keith, Jeremiah, welcome and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Jack.
Thanks, Jack.
You got it. Now, before we dive into all things GEM, I have to say that I am a sucker for origin stories. You know, kind of like how did Bruce Banner become the Incredible Hulk? So let's give our audience your origin stories. Keith, let me start with you, if that's okay. Could you tell us a bit about your background, why graduate enrollment for your career, and why did you decide to pursue a leadership role in NAGAP?
Great. Well, like so many people that I've talked to working in GEM, I kind of fell into it. I worked for about 9 years on the undergraduate side and then left higher ed for a short period of time, went back to my roots in the performing and fine arts, and then had the opportunity, wanted to get back into higher ed, wanted to get back into enrollment management, and had the opportunity to return to a small school outside of Toledo, Ohio, Lourdes University, and basically create their graduate admissions office, and was there for about 8.5 years before coming here to Bowling Green State University about 5 years ago. And have really enjoyed this. It's given me kind of the, picture of both sides, undergrad and grad, and kind of all that means, and especially with the GEM model, as we're talking about today, Jack, emerging and what that looks like, and able to put some of those things into practice here at Bowling Green State University. And then as far as your other question, as far as a leadership role, I've always believed in giving something back. So for me, taking on a leadership role in NAGAP was very simply, I have learned and benefited so much from the network, from the professional development, and from so many other things through NAGAP. This was simply my way to give something back to the association and to those who invested in me.
Yeah, and being part of NAGAP, being involved in NAGAP, it's been just a super fun experience for me as well. It really is just a great professional community to be a part of. So thanks to you for your leadership with it.
Thank you.
You got it. Jeremiah, you also decided to embrace a career in graduate enrollment, as well as leadership within NAGAP. So how did this journey begin for you, and what caused you to make it a significant portion of your professional life?
Sure. So I started my career in higher education, believe it or not, 20 years ago, despite my youthful glow. And so I've been working with graduate students, particularly in business schools, since about 2001. So I started with undergrads doing academic advising, but quickly moved into the executive MBA and MBA for working professional space, first at University of Hartford in Connecticut, where I'm from originally, and then down here in North Carolina. So I have had the great benefit of working on some of the best business school teams in the world, which has been a great joy for me, and continues to bring just a tremendous sense of kind of pride and accomplishment as I see the potential that these students are able to kind of realize as a result of elevating their professional and personal lives with the addition of a business degree. So that's been really fun. So that's certainly what keeps me engaged and excited about coming to work every day, is kind of the transformative nature of this work that we do. And also the idea that a graduate degree provides a level of access for people into kind of new career paths and opportunities to achieve new life goals that they never even knew were possible at the beginning of their programs. And so just the potential to change people's lives in a meaningful way has really been great, and what has kind of kept me involved. And certainly I have been changed as a result of my NAGAP experience. In the same way that Keith mentioned, this is just an extraordinary community of people, all supremely dedicated and passionate about helping make their students' lives better. And I've learned so much, and really in the same way that Keith is kind of drawn to leadership when you've been given so much, you feel like anything that you can do to help elevate the organization, you want to do it. And that's kind of what drew me into my first role with NAGAP and has kept pushing me forward since.
Yeah, I agree. My teams always used to call me a major cornball because I would say to them, guys, we're in higher ed. We are in the dreams business. So I certainly can relate with what you've said. A quick note for our audience: this is more a webcast than a traditional webinar, so you will see the slides advance here, but we aren't really presenting necessarily to the slides. Rather, the information displayed is there to provide some context. So if you absolutely must peel your eyes away from the screen, it's okay, so long as you continue to listen. Keith, Jeremiah, we are about to get into really about all things GEM, the evolution of GEM, the beginnings of the model, why it developed, its current state, its future. But for the benefit of our audience, can you define GEM? Jeremiah, I'm going to start with you on this one. A simple question, I think maybe not so much a simple answer, but what is graduate enrollment management? Jeremiah, if you were answering my question, you might be on mute.
Thank you for that. You are right that it is not a simple answer, because as we started the organization called NAGAP, it was really admissions focused. And what quickly became clear is that or perhaps not quickly, but certainly as GEM has evolved, it became clear that admissions is only one piece of the larger puzzle. And what makes it even more interesting and complex is that every campus and every campus culture has led kind of the way that graduate enrollment management is delivered to evolve in subtle different ways, sometimes related to the politics of the place, sometimes just related to the staffing and people's preferences and values. And so we'll talk a little bit more about kind of centralized versus decentralized model, but in essence, to get down to the heart of the definition, graduate enrollment management is kind of a big picture approach. It's really thinking from a holistic, big picture way about the life of our students, and not just thinking about each of us sitting in our own silos or boxes. So the graphic, if you're looking at the screen, the graphic that you see there represents many of the silos that have traditionally existed in graduate enrollment and sit on most of our campuses. For many of us, these are actually the names of departments, right? So those silos are codified in that way. But the GEM model, the thinking from a GEM perspective, is really all about taking all of those different functions, because from a student's perspective, they're having a university experience. They're not necessarily thinking about, well, now I'm kind of transitioning out of the admission space and into the enrolled student space, even though, you know, those of us on the other side of the fence, that's exactly kind of how we think about it sometimes. So
Sure.
when we're really kind of helping students in a more holistic way and thinking about their whole experience, we are cross-training, we are developing a deep understanding of all the different aspects of the enrollment experience that students' lives touch in the course of their being students, all the way from the idea of kind of original interest or research consideration, all the way through the kind of marketing and admissions processes, through their being a student and being kind of engaged in the kind of tactical operations, the funding that they need, the support services, the advising, all the way through graduation and alumni. And for those of us that work in this space, it's really quite intuitive, because if it's anything like my original couple of jobs, I was the graduate enrollment office for my college, right? So, like, I mean, it wasn't because I wanted to know all things about every aspect of a student's life, but it was literally, it was me and my admin, and we were responsible for the college's graduate student experience, period. So other than kind of their academic component. Now, over time, that evolved, and I was able to hire staff to help take on kind of specialization roles. But for most of us, or for many of us, our teams are very, very lean. And so we have to kind of adapt and become experts in lots of different areas, simply to ensure that our students have a continuous kind of uninterrupted experience that's free from many of the bureaucratic hassles that exist with institutions that are hundreds of years old. So any ways that we can break down those barriers and create opportunities for students to have a positive experience, it all feeds together, right? If people have a positive experience through the admissions process as a student, see the career outcomes that they're looking for, they are going to then be ambassadors for the program, feed in more students into the pipeline. And so all of these kind of positive experiences throughout the enrollment process it's kind of a continuous cycle, which is why that integrated interdependence model that you see there on the screen kind of captures that kind of circular view that all of these pieces fit together for students.
Yeah, and I think the GEM model is just in and of itself much more student facing, right? I mean, I think when students themselves are thinking about attending graduate school and enrolling in a graduate program, they're certainly not thinking about it in terms of, oh, well, this office will do this for me and this office will do that for me. They're thinking about it in terms of, this is the experience I want, and I'm going to make that known. And my hope is that folks will be able to assist me. So I think that the integration of service, and it, by definition, it's student focused nature, is in and of itself just a much more kind of student facing student service experience. Keith, I'm going to transition a little bit to kind of the evolution of GEM. On NAGAP's resources section of their website, people can find a great webinar recording actually about GEM from a few years ago. And I remember something in particular kind of standing out to me. Ariana Balayan, who I believe is now at Suffolk University, was talking about the limited literature on GEM. She mentioned that if you asked Google about GEM, only a few results would come back. And to me, that signified how much GEM was in its early kind of emergence phase. So Keith, what do you feel triggered the more cohesive development of GEM? I guess this is piggybacking a little bit on Jeremiah's answer in terms of the definition of GEM, but what really inspired GEM's emergence?
Well, I think a lot of that was originally driven, and you mentioned Ariana by name already, but certainly the research that she and Chris Connor and Josh Lefebvre conducted with our research committee in NAGAP about 6 years ago was significant. And a lot of that was driven by something that Jeremiah already mentioned, which is so many of us working in the GEM profession don't work in GEM or in that model because that's what we're seeking to do. That's just where we find ourselves. And that was certainly my situation as well at my prior institution. And so I think what's moving that forward is as budgets on many of our campuses are cut, the necessity of serving our students increases, and in fact their desire to be served in maybe a similar capacity or a similar way in which they were served as undergraduate students, that's driving that need forward, and we're simply finding ourselves needing to really kind of round out the services that we're able to provide to our students. So I think that's moving the GEM model forward. Really, there's a need for it, and we're kind of responding to that need.
Yeah, I should mention that I went to Google a couple weeks ago, as part of the preparation for today, and placed in quotes the term graduate enrollment management. I am happy to report that there were certainly enough results to take me to page 2. So my question for you is, how do you see GEM's evolution? Do you feel the concept of GEM has passed beyond this emergence phase, and what do you think are some of the reasons it has or that it hasn't? And it might be different, right, at various institutions.
Sure, and I think that's totally true, Jack. And as we talked kind of prior to this webinar today, each individual institution, the way that they implement a GEM model is totally unique. Many of our peers at the undergraduate level, what they do is very much mirrored from campus to campus to campus, but the way that graduate enrollment works on each individual campus is totally different, or can be totally different. And in fact, even within some campuses, depending on the size of the campus, if it's a professional school, if it's a law school, a medical school, might be different than your arts and sciences. What I'm looking here prior to the call, I looked this up, but about a year and a half ago, NAGAP conducted a needs assessment among our members, and a couple of the questions that we asked had specifically to do with the GEM model. And, we were trying to figure this out and look at this very question. Has it emerged? Where are we in this continuum of GEM? And we were actually quite pleased and shocked that when asked the question, do you feel you possess a working definition of graduate enrollment management, or GEM, almost 93% of our members said, yes, I do possess a working definition. I understand what that means. And nearly over 87% said that they consider themselves to be a graduate enrollment management professional. The one place where, and this was not a surprise to us, do you use the term GEM on your campus or among your peers? And that response was still about 31 to 32%. So those who have been working in it or are working in it for any period of time, they're kind of getting that. They understand what graduate enrollment management is, or at least they believe that they do. But the catching, that term catching on their campuses is maybe lagging just a bit behind. So, what is the next step of this? And that kind of gets to the gist of your question, Jack. I think the next step for us now as an association and as a profession is to take this model that has been so well defined over the last several years and to take it into, how does this apply? How does it use in practice now? And I think that will do exactly what you're saying, helping it to emerge now onto our campuses. What does this look like? And in fact, we've asked our professional development committee to do that very thing and to kind of launch this at our Winter Institute in January that was mentioned earlier. We have a panel discussion that will take place at that institute that will be leaders in GEM and asking them specifically, how are you applying this model in unique ways, in very practical ways, on your own individual campuses? And I expect that to be a very rich discussion. I also expect it to be very diverse. The responses we get, I'm sure, will vary widely.
Yeah, but that's going to be super beneficial because, part of my role, I have conversations with folks in graduate enrollment every day. I'm trying, as we try to identify various challenges and pain points that graduate enrollment professionals have as they're doing their work, and then obviously try to develop solutions and services to relieve those pains and create true, meaningful, lasting gains for folks. One of the things that comes up repeatedly for me is that the use of graduate enrollment management, I think, aligns really nicely with your survey. People consider themselves to be GEM professionals, which is great. The other thing is looking for really sound examples as to what the GEM model means for, quote, my institution. So I think the more that we can provide those examples and really show the continuum of those examples will be beneficial for folks. Speaking of examples, I want to turn to some current examples of GEM in action. But before we do that, I'd like to ask your thoughts on how the term is used. So one of the things that stood out to me as I reviewed the Google results I mentioned earlier is that it appears the term is used in two distinct ways. So the first is appropriately referring to the GEM model as this departmental integration that's focused on student service and success throughout the graduate student life cycle. And the other seems to be a simpler description of the enrollment profession. So when I used to be asked about my profession, I would respond, "Oh, I'm in higher education, specifically graduate admissions," right? Now it seems folks are referring to their profession as graduate enrollment management, and this is sometimes regardless as to whether their institution is truly a GEM model practitioner. So my question, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this. I mean, one, do you agree with the premise of my question? Two, if so, how do you feel about the term GEM being used in this way as a profession descriptor? Does it in any way dilute the purpose or dilute the meaning of the GEM model?
Well, I think it could certainly dilute it a bit, but I think anytime we get the term out there, it helps the overall profession. And, it's a recognition of the term, a recognition of the philosophy that we're trying to promote. But, one of the things that I think we've already kind of alluded to here on this webinar is that for some people and for some practitioners, the GEM model is in fact very simplistic, either because they have limited resources, they have limited staff, they have limited time, or in fact even limited understanding and knowledge of what GEM really is. And I think that's one of the things that we're trying to do as an association is to help the GEM professional. In fact, that's much of what NAGAP is all about, is providing professional development to graduate enrollment management professionals who are seeking help, seeking assistance, seeking educational opportunities to do what they do and what they're being asked to do better. And so, we do that through our annual conference you've mentioned, through our professional development institutes. We've also launched a monthly webinar series of our own. And so we are very actively trying to find ways to provide those answers to people's questions about GEM in ways that if they don't have the resources, that hey, they can get in on our webinars or get our white papers or whatever the case might be, to help them understand really what this model is in practice, so that they can go from where they are right now to whatever the next step is on their campus.
Yeah, and Keith, you and we were talking a couple weeks ago, and I said, it's interesting in graduate, because compared to our undergraduate colleagues, it's nice to feel some of the love from time to time, because so many of our undergraduate friends tend to feel all the love sometimes. So
indeed,
for me, so for me, I think when I think part of the such rapid adoption of kind of the term graduate enrollment management as a way to describe oneself as a professional, as a graduate enrollment professional, really was to look at it and say, if I take a look at all the things that I do professionally, the value I'm creating for students, the value I'm creating for faculty through helping to shape their classes, et cetera, I am a true graduate enrollment professional. That is me too. So I certainly applaud people adopting that as their professional description, and then obviously all the things that come with the model as well. All right, so now I'm going to open this up to both of you. I want to get to GEM in action. So can you provide some examples of institutions who are really walking the walk, who've embraced the GEM model, who out there is doing some really great GEM work? And I should say, feel free to use yourselves and your campuses as examples.
I'll jump in. So I will say certainly it's true at Wake Forest School of Business. I operate in a pretty unique circumstance here because we are on a satellite campus that's about an hour away from the main campus, and we have a kind of fully staffed team of professionals here in Charlotte. So that has created, by necessity, a need for us to kind of make sure that all of our students' experience are kind of fully satisfied locally. And so that has really created a lot of collaboration. And because it is a small team, it has created the opportunity for us to really get to understand each other's work and think about the work that we do in a collaborative way. So God forbid one of us is not available or ends up leaving the institution, excuse me, then we need to be able to step in and make sure that the students' needs are met. And that actually happened right when I first got here to Wake. We lost our career services person, and we were all kind of stepping in to make sure that as best we could, that the students' needs were being met, and trying to leverage the main campus to fill in whatever gaps that were were there. So it has been great for us, and certainly great for me as the enrollment management kind of lead on the admissions side of enrollment management, that we've really been able to think about the work that we do, whether it's career services or student services, alumni, marketing. All of us collaborate together because we, one, we have to, but two, all of them are thinking about the work that they do and how it feeds the enrollment pipeline. So for me, that's a dramatic shift, because it would be certainly easy for career to only focus on career outcomes and not think about how their involvement in the kind of application, admission, and kind of orientation stage of a student's experience could have a dramatic impact on whether they find this to be a compelling program for them, whether they feel connected to the program and that it's going to meet their goals and expectations, and ultimately whether that student applies and or is yielded to the program. So getting to that place where people buy into a bigger picture and understanding that when enrollment management is successful, admissions is successful, that means you're getting the best candidates possible, and it sets everybody else's experience up for future success.
Yeah, and you mentioned, Jeremiah, you mentioned buy-in there. We're definitely, I think, going to tackle that a bit. Keith, any other examples of GEM in action you want to highlight?
You know, I guess ironically, the institution that I would bring up is my own, and I use the word ironically because this is pre my time here at Bowling Green State University, but up until about 8 or 9 years ago, my understanding is that BG had a very robust GEM model that included student services counselors who literally worked with all of the graduate students from first touch all the way until the time that they graduated. They had a registrar function within the graduate college. They had professional development services right within the graduate college. And then they had, then the institution moved toward a strong enrollment management focus, but the focus ended up being more on the undergraduate side. And so a lot of those services that were provided or had been provided for the graduate students were kind of moved out to those functional areas. And so that level of service declined significantly. Now, what I'm pleased to report is that I work for a dean, Peggy Booth, who very much believes in rebuilding some of those pieces, bringing that service back to our students. And so even just within the last couple of years, you know, we in graduate enrollment still provide the orientation program for incoming students. We've added a professional development component to work with our students across the graduate enterprise. And so slowly but surely, we're adding some resources, we're adding some focus to really help our students to be successful. I mean, that's ultimately the goal of this model is student success. And that's the direction that we're moving in here at BG. And certainly, Jack, there are many other, you know, there are so many different institutions that are doing great work, and I'm just not as familiar with them. The one that comes to mind for me, and again, part of the reason that he was a part of the paper was I always admired the work that was being done at the University at Buffalo, and Chris Connor, some of the work that he was doing there, I really respected. They were doing some awesome things there, and Josh Lefebvre too, you know, at SUNY Potsdam. Very much deeply ingrained in bringing this model to life and continuing to develop it and move it forward on their own campuses. So I just want to give them a shout out because they're just two examples that I think are doing great work.
Yeah, and you're referring to a white paper, I believe, that's housed on the GEM Resources page of the NAGAP website. So we'll make sure that folks get the NAGAP website if they don't know it already. We'll make sure they get that toward the end of our presentation today. And what you're seeing here on the screen, these are examples of various case studies that are also housed on that GEM Resources page as well. Keith, just touching on what you mentioned, because I think one of the things that's coming across here is that adoption of the GEM model, it isn't all or nothing. And, we see these kind of incremental approaches at times. So any advice or thoughts around folks who are just looking for kind of that first step, like this is the way I can kind of begin a kind of incremental approach? What would that first step kind of be?
Sure. And I think, Jack, when you and I were talking a couple weeks ago, we kind of talked about how NAGAP's professional development, like if you go to annual conference, our sessions are designed like this, where our presenters are asked and encouraged to give, like, what's one nugget? What's one thing that, if somebody were to take it back to their campus, that they could implement right away? Well, that's the same thing that I would encourage our listeners to do today. There may be some things that we talk about today that, is it professional development? Is that the next step? And maybe it's just offering one or two seminars a semester for your graduate students. Is it necessarily something that you're responsible for? Well, maybe not, but maybe you could go to your graduate dean or whatever area you report to and say, hey, I think this would be really beneficial for our students. We'd love to offer a session in how to prepare for your thesis or your dissertation, or what do you do if you're finding yourself to be under stress? What are some of the resources that are available? It doesn't have to be complicated. It can, like you're saying, it can start very simply. It can be one step at a time. And, the idea is to move the needle in a positive direction.
I would just jump in and say it can even get a little bit more simple than that. You could really, as an individual contributor, adopt a GEM mindset to be able to just look at your institution from a holistic way and ways that you can potentially learn about the different ways that the different departments work together, who the people are to answer questions, rather than sending somebody to a department to connect them to another human in another place, to be able to look for ways that you can help each other, or where there are opportunities for you to kind of jointly deliver programs or services in ways that would make it kind of a better, more rich experience for students. So if somebody's looking to get started and wants to kind of walk this walk, the best thing they can do is just kind of take a little bit of ownership and leadership and start to get outside of their office space and start connecting with other people on their campus.
Yeah, and I think yeah, go ahead, Keith.
I was just going to say real quick, Jack, tag teaming with what Jeremiah just said. I want to give the example of Ohio State University and one of our colleagues, Jillian Baer, who, I don't know how many years ago now, 3-4 years ago, pulled together some colleagues on that campus that were working in graduate enrollment management and said, hey, you know what? There are many, many, many of us across a campus this size. We need to pull together and find some common ground across colleges, across functionality, to really start looking at the GEM model. And in fact, now they have an organization on that campus that they host their own conference for GEM professionals. And now they invite other campuses like Bowling Green State University. We're invited to this GEM Professional Development Day at Ohio State because of how much success they've experienced in doing exactly what you just said, Jeremiah.
That's great. I think that one of the things that I have seen in my own contributions to those professional conferences, I've presented at NAGAP, PAGAP, the Pennsylvania chapter, and I'm often asked in the questions that I received about building consensus for cooperation among institutional stakeholders. And Jeremiah, you kind of touched on this. For those out there who remain part of a more traditional kind of siloed model, what advice would you provide them if they are aspiring to embrace the GEM approach? I mean, cultivating buy-in from stakeholders can be a key challenge at times. Do you have advice on how best to navigate that?
I think
Go ahead,
You
Keith.
go, Jeremiah. You go first.
Okay.
No.
Okay, so
You go.
I have a little bit of a benefit. I've been able to build some of these bridges because I sit in the business school, and we generally have a little bit more financial resources than some of the other colleges. And when you have some dollars and you're willing to put them to work for kind of a program or an initiative that is to the benefit of the larger campus, people are usually pretty receptive to that. So if you have a supportive dean, or if you have a little bit of discretion in your budget, that's one easy way to kind of open the door, is to just to leverage the resources that you already have and make them more available to people than just those in your own campus or program office. So that I've found to be pretty helpful. And we actually, in a previous life, I worked at University of North Carolina at Charlotte, and we actually were the pilot and paid for it, the online application system. So like many business schools, we operate in a dramatically decentralized model. we tend to be on our own islands in the business school doing our own little thing, but we were willing to kind of take on the cost of launching this new online application system, and had such good success with it that it was then adopted by the graduate school and rolled out across the entire campus. So, there's lots of ways that if you have that kind of larger mindset, that you may be willing to maybe yield a little bit of your own fiefdom in order to benefit the larger whole. And kind of the net effect for me was no downside. I mean, it was managed by another budget after that first year, and somebody else was kind of managing the upgrade and the training and all of that other stuff. So it was all win and no loss for me.
Keith, anything to add?
Yeah, the only other thing I would, I guess, add on to that is just the idea that data in all of this is so important, that even if you take baby steps, be sure that you the successes of the steps that you do take. So, it may be the result of some of those things is maybe your retention improves just slightly. Maybe your student satisfaction is just a slight bit better. All of those things, that's what our senior administrators on our campuses want to see. They want to see that what they're investing in is making a difference, a tangible difference, that helps the bottom line. And I think in most cases, the GEM model ultimately benefits not just the students we serve, but the institutions we serve as well. Yeah, and I think for me, it's always been a matter of, you don't have to be someone who has this incredible gift at building these wonderful interpersonal relationships, or this super strong political skill set. Like any negotiation, it really comes down to, how do you get to yes? And that's really about the shared interests that you have. And for all of us in graduate education and higher education as a whole, the shared interest is a positive student experience. So that's kind of where I've always started those conversations, and looking for kind of co-ownership and buy-in. And it sounds like you two are doing pretty much the same thing. Keith, I want to shift a little bit. We've seen a modest decline recently in graduate enrollments overall, more so with international student enrollments specifically. In fact, I just wrote a piece for the Capture blog on the international decline. And timing can be everything. Are you concerned at all that these declines could be viewed as an indictment of the GEM approach, particularly among institutions that have more recently embraced the GEM model? No, not at all. I think, if anything, I mean, if you talk within higher ed circles, we all kind of understand what's bringing on some of these declines, in particular with the international populations. And I think it's actually the GEM model that in many cases is benefiting and helping campuses to move beyond some of these things, and helping them to at least stay flat. That's one of the things that, in fact, I was interviewed a couple weeks ago by the Chronicle of Higher Ed about, what are we doing here at Bowling Green in this very regard. And one of the things that we've done that I think fits well within the GEM model is that we've partnered with our International Student Services Office And we work, as our international students, graduate students are admitted, we conduct webinars, kind of the next steps. That is a kind of the transition we talk about, everything from the visa process to orientation, and both graduate orientation, and we also have a separate international orientation, and everything in between. And the whole focus is your success on our campus. And so I think it's really the GEM model that will, for many schools that have embraced that, they'll find that to be extremely beneficial as we go through some of these difficult times.
Agreed. I just want to let our audience know that we are going to be shifting over to questions here shortly. So if you do have questions, Amanda referenced in the beginning of our talk that questions chat box feature. So go ahead and place your questions in there, and we will get to those shortly. Guys, I want to take out a crystal ball here for a moment. And before we talk about the future more long-term, I want to mention a couple items in the near future. We've already touched on them. Again, the NAGAP Winter Institute is coming up in San Juan beginning on January 19th. And of course, the 2019 NAGAP Annual Conference will be in Toronto this year in April. So this is me giving you an opportunity, guys, for a shameless plug. What should attendees expect from both of these events?
Well, I'll kind of run with Winter Institute. Winter Institute is really, it's kind of our opportunity as an association to provide additional professional development opportunities for those who have been in leadership roles or maybe are moving into leadership roles and have been working in GEM for 5 years or more. It really tends to be, associate directors, deans, professionals at that level, decision makers. And really, if you go to our website and you take a look at that agenda, the lineup this year is amazing. It really is an outstanding lineup. And we bring in, the top experts across the country in the specific, who can address the challenges that we are facing in graduate enrollment management. We bring them into Winter Institute. And so I think that's a great opportunity for those who may be listening today. Take a look at that, see whether that agenda fits your needs. Jeremiah, do you want to talk a little bit about annual?
Sure, happy to. So annual conference, super excited that it's in Toronto this year, one of the world's most amazing cities. And we are focusing on global, particularly we had this picked out several years ago, as it turns out, but it turns out with the international challenges that we're experiencing here in the US, going to Canada, who has seen a boom as a result, and also the kind of framework that many of the workshops will cover will have that kind of global lens to it, which is really great. But the conference is April 10th through 13th. And there'll be around 1,000 professionals there from all different aspects of GEM. And these are mostly practitioner developed and delivered workshops. So they're going to be many of them will be very hands-on to help people think through and solve some of the current problems that they're facing. You will leave with a bucket of ideas that you will be urgent and excited to get back to your campus to be able to implement for sure. I always try and kind of keeping a running list of how do we try this or how do I adopt that. And I have to say there's a lot of professional organizations out there, but because we draw from a spectrum of different functional areas, so PhD in biology and business schools and law schools and people have been addressing the unique challenges on their campus, and they are generous and wonderful in kind of sharing what they've learned and allowing you kind of their wisdom in order to be able to adapt it for your own campus benefit. So you will meet a community of people that you will never forget. If you've never been to one of our annual conferences before, it is extraordinary how many times you'll say, "Oh my gosh, you do that too," because you're in a group of people who actually kind of get you. They live your challenges every day, and experience your joys as well. So it's a great community of like-minded people, and you'll exchange business cards and make LinkedIn connections with folks that you'll be able to connect with and call upon for years to come.
Yeah, it's just super fun. And Capture will be there again this year, which means I'll be there again. It's a great building that network and having those opportunities to just kind of brainstorm with folks and share experiences, even outside of the sessions themselves. It's just a fun time. We're going to shift over here to questions in 1 second, but I just want to ask you both kind of a simple question just about GEM's future. How bullish are you for GEM as you look toward the future?
I'm very bullish on it. I think that it's certainly, I mean, I don't think we're turning back anytime soon. I think this is I think it is the future. And I think for a lot of schools, I think if they don't head this direction, especially, you know, as we continue to see some of the challenges for the smaller private schools, I think this is a necessity. I think it's something that they'll need to implement. And even for the larger schools, if they haven't already, you know, I know many schools that are in discussions about what that might look like on their campuses, and I think that's definitely where we're headed.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. Sure. A couple of other things on the horizon that I think are going to be elevating the profile of graduate enrollment management on people's campuses is the challenges in demographics for a lot of parts of this country related to traditional age students are going to kind of raise that profile, and grad is going to become much more important because it's going to be a little bit more sustainable perhaps than the traditional 18 to 21-year-old undergraduate population. And I think a lot of programs that are delivering to working adult undergraduate students are going to find value in thinking this way about that population as well. So I think there's going to be some opportunity to kind of take the lessons that we've learned and extend them even further into that space. And then lastly, with the rise of online education, I think there's a lot of opportunity as we think about kind of how this model works in an environment where somebody may never step foot on your campus, and how do you ensure that there's a continuum of support and engagement throughout that student life cycle in a way that for many online programs has just not existed. There has been no career services, there has been no student services, there's been no programming outside of the courses that you dial into. So I think that that's kind of next level thinking in terms of how you ensure that those graduate students, which are increasingly larger portions of our graduate population, how are they getting their needs met as well?
Well, at the risk of sounding like a cornball again, I think at NAGAP this year we should give out GEM sunglasses, because GEM's future is so bright. You guys are groaning. You're groaning. All right. Amanda, please save me from myself.
I'm going to say that Capture will not be doing that. So you guys, Keith, Jeremiah, you have a lot of questions. I'm not surprised. So I'm just going to hand pick a couple of these, and what we don't get to in the next 5 minutes or so, we'll get some answers from you guys to distribute out in our follow-up email. So here's a couple. From Andy Morris. Often we see and hear online from GEM folk, they're having difficulty generating prospects. Grad fairs and name buys don't pump up don't pump in many quality prospects. What are some successful, efficient, and cost-effective strategies for prospect generation? Help us, Obi-Wan.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, the shift that we've made for sure here at Wake, we still do pound the pavement quite a bit, but thinking more about relationships and partnerships from a cost perspective, that's certainly the way to go. We have invested quite a bit in ensuring that our alumni are engaged, which is not often something that admissions offices take on, but creating opportunities for our alums to continue to be connected to the students that are on our campus. A third of our last MBA class came from referrals. So that is, I mean, we have a little bit of a way to just kind of thank them with a dinner and that kind of thing, but it's pretty low cost per referral. So definitely thinking in that kind of bigger picture perspective about who are the people with the eyes and ears on the ground is one thing. And then the other thing I would just point to that I'm sure is obvious and you're already aware of, but kind of cost per referral, other than those connections with alumni and friends in the community, would be digital, where you can be really targeted and only spend in ways where people are clicking through, and you can be really intentional about the people that you're getting. That's going to be much more effective than standing at a table in a fair and spending thousands of dollars in travel, for sure.
Yeah. And one of the things that I would add to that we've done with some success here at Bowling Green State University is we have encouraged our program coordinators to identify four-year institutions within, let's say, 50 to 100 miles of our campus who are offering undergraduate programs in their disciplines, but not graduate programs, and then encourage them to start building relationships with those faculty, maybe being a guest lecturer or, you know, delivering a webinar or something like that to just build up some interest, build relationships, engage the faculty and students on those campuses. And some of our departments have done that with some significant success, and others maybe not so much. But it's certainly a low-cost way of, you know, and using the word that Jeremiah did, it's really about building relationships. And it seems somewhat old school, but it really does make a difference.
Jack, can you speak to your time when you were at Jefferson? So Jack, before he was here, was on campus and was a client of Capture. So I would love for you to talk about what you did on campus with your lead generation as well.
Yeah, well, I do think it comes down to relationships. I think that's a big piece of why so many people remain in higher education. I know from my own staffs, members of my staff, that they were in higher ed to really build those relationships with students in ways that really let them kind of convey the value of the graduate student experience and the academic program experience. So anything that we can do to help our recruitment and enrollment teams do that, the better. We also instituted something called Jefferson Rise, which I'm hopeful to talk about more in April at NAGAP. Jefferson Rise is a program where we were able to work with faculty and graduate programs and have them identify undergraduate programs that align nicely with the graduate degree. And we were able to kind of take a segment of the graduating class and even recent alumni and provide them with kind of a pre-admission, if you will, where a certain set of seats were saved in these programs for those students. So cultivating the relationship and connection that those students already had with the institution. I could go on, Amanda, but I want to be sensitive to time. We're 2 minutes before 2 o'clock.
Yes, I'm sorry. I thought you cut out there. We do have a number of questions. I would like to end with one question. How can individual, often understaffed graduate units recruit and retain students if they're responsible for both?
Well, I would just jump in and say, I think for most of us, we recognize that retention is much more cost effective than recruitment. So if there isn't somebody who's responsible for ensuring that the kind of student is having a positive experience while in the program, it's going to be to your benefit to keep them. So kind of investing that time is going to certainly help your retention numbers. It is hard when you're expected to be all things and to do all things, for sure. I don't want to minimize that in any way. And a lot of times I will say, sometimes it's just about putting infrastructure in place, because graduate students are an underutilized resource. They are often eager to be leaders and to mobilize and to provide services and support each other and lend their expertise to each other. So there's often, if you look for kind of underutilized resources on your campus, doesn't have to be dollars and cents necessarily. There's often ways that you can kind of put some pieces in place and then let other people run with it and just kind of offer some support and guidance to them.
Well, and I think the only thing that I would add to that is, I've been to many NAGAP professional development, either the annual conference or PDIs, where, again, we have lots of our members who are on smaller campuses. They're struggling in the same way. They have limited resources, limited staff, and just being able to network with people in like or similar circumstances, that has been so valuable to me. I've got, 12 or 15 NAGAP peers who, if I come up with a situation or a scenario, I can email them right away and get feedback, or I can say, look, here's something I'm trying to figure out. I'm responsible for admissions, and now they're saying I also need to be responsible for retention. Does anybody just have a couple quick and easy ideas that might make an immediate difference for me on my campus? And inevitably, I'll end up with 3, 4, 5 ideas by the end of the day, which is just so valuable to me.
Yeah, and just so folks know, as we move to close out here, I referenced those conversations that I've been having with folks about their GEM challenges, some of the successes they've had, but the challenges, and the challenge set is pretty much the same from institution to institution, regardless of whether you have a centralized model or decentralized model. The lack of performance for quote unquote traditional graduate search, and the need, Jeremiah, to kind of bring in what I refer to as modern graduate search, which is that targeted digital element, the struggle with high performing qualified leads, and the ability to leverage technology in ways that provide us with organic inquiries that are going to perform at a higher level, to kind of battle against that stealthy graduate secret shopper that we all deal with. We did a presentation a couple weeks ago where we focused a lot on the outcomes of that research and those challenges and some of the solutions that have been developed. So we certainly can share that with folks who have joined us today as well. For folks that if we didn't get to answer your questions, we certainly will provide those to Jeremiah and to Keith for follow-up via email, if you two don't mind. Guys, any closing thoughts?
I just appreciate your bringing us in, Jack, to this discussion. I guess the one thing that I wanted to mention is that I'm not sure that all of the resources that someone might be looking for will be available on that resource page on our website. So things like that white paper that we talked about, if it's something that I don't know off the top of my head if that's available to everyone, if you're not a member, some of our resources are member only and some are, available right on the, on the homepage. But if that piece in particular, if somebody's looking for more information on the model, the GEM model, if they email either one of us, we can provide that very easily.
Great. We'll be sure to. Sure, go ahead, Jeremiah.
Sorry, the only other thing I was going to throw in was NAGAP is all about the network and the people. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me on LinkedIn and connect. And if people have questions or if there's a way that we can be useful or helpful, that's really what we're here for. So don't be shy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. And we'll be sure to include both of your email address, contact information with the follow-up to those who attended the webinar today. So thank you both for offering to do that. Amanda, any final thoughts from you?
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at our upcoming conferences. And please do send us feedback on today's presentation and other topics that you would like to see Capture or NAGAP cover in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to echo that as well. I want to thank Keith Ramsdell and Jeremiah Nelson for taking the time to share their insights on graduate enrollment management. Stay informed on all things GEM by visiting NAGAP, the Association of Graduate Enrollment Management. at www.nagap.org. Let me try that again, www.nagap.org. And for GEM insights, as well as enrollment marketing strategy news and all the services provided for GEM practitioners, be sure to visit capturehighered.com/blog. I'm Jack Klett, Director of Graduate and Online Initiatives. For Keith Ramsdell, Jeremiah Nelson, Amanda Scott, have the happiest of holidays and make it a great day, everybody. Thank you.